So here you want to make a video game. We're going to be taking the next 50 minutes to making one, and at the end of it, you guys will have this as the end result. It doesn't look like a lot, but we're going over a lot of the concepts that you need to learn to understand how to code so that you can manipulate this basic project and start to really make it feel like your own. So in today's video, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I am just going to be making a game with you guys. We're not going to be creating anything crazy, not going to be anything revolutionary, but we're going to create a project in GameMaker Studios 2, and we're going to try to create something that you can potentially show your friends and get feedback from them. You can build on this, but we're going to keep it simple. So when you open up GameMaker Studios 2, you're going to start a new project, and I would definitely recommend using GameMaker language just because you can use drag and drop, but you're not going to learn any of the coding side of things. And I think it's very important because game making can kind of help you to maybe start learning coding and potentially make life easier in the future if you're trying to get a job in something like coding or go to school for coding. So anyway, we start up a project, and you're going to notice that you have these tabs on the side. So the main things that we're going to be using today is Sprites, which is just for any kind of visual representation. So for our character sprites, objects, anything like that, grass, whatever. Scripts, we probably won't be using today, but scripts are very important. It's just an easier way to clean up your code and have code in a specific place. Objects, we're going to be talking about in a sec, but let's just start with the sprites. So we're going to create a sprite. So we're just going to do S player. I usually like to name things. I like to keep names consistent. So let's just go over into here and just create a small object. I like to use 16 by 16 or 32 by 32 sized canvases. And we're just going to make a blank sprite. We can make our character, little green guy here. If you hit G, you can open up the paint bucket. Oh my god, I don't know how to speak. And then I usually like to center all my sprites just to make sure that if we do any kind of flipping on the X and Y scale, then we can still keep it consistent. So we're going to create a player, we're going to create an enemy, and we're probably going to create some kind of death wall type scenario. So let's just create another thing, and we're just going to go back into here and create a little thing like this. Hit F, and then you can use a paint bucket just to fill, keeping things very, very simple for now. And then let's create this wall, and it's not going to act technically as a wall. I want it to be some kind of obstacle that will kill you if you run into it. So let's just keep these, maybe black. Maybe black is good. Actually, you know what? We'll do a different aesthetic. We'll go for black, actually. All right, let's go for black. And then the last object that we want to create is going to be we're going to create a gun. That is going to move towards where you're shooting, and then we're going to create a bullet. So we're going to create this gun sprite. We're just going to create basically like a top-down shooter. So yeah, maybe an 8x8 canvas here. And this isn't really going to look like a gun. I apologize, but you guys can spend some time on the pixel art. I actually made a video on creating pixel art, so if you want to check that out, you can. But here's our gun. Here's our nice little gun, and we're going to show that this is the front of our gun. Look at that. Beautiful. There we go. So now that we have all of our sprites set up, once we get this 4x4 little circle here, then that might be a little too small, but we'll go with it. We'll create a little thing. There we go. And just like that, we got all of our sprites. Now let me just center all of these sprites to make sure that they're good. I think for this sprite we want to keep it more to the back in the middle. So let's do like a middle left, sorry. The walls we can keep. It doesn't really matter. I think that keeping any kind of terrain object is good to keep it at the top left because it keeps it consistent when you open up the room, which we'll also go over in a sec. But there we go. So now we're going to create an object, and the first object we're going to make is our player object. So we're going to create a player object, and if you go into here, if you click on this, it's going to allow you to create a sprite for this object. You can change it at any time, but yeah. So right click, add an event, and let's create a create event. And what a create event is going to do is basically you can set up anything you want in the character object, and it'll apply it once, and it'll never do it again. It'll do it when it creates the object, and it'll never do it again. So this is where you want to set up all of your variables and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to keep it simple, and we're just going to say speed. We're just going to set up a speed variable, and we're going to have speed equal to 1 for now. You can change these things around. Maybe we'll do 1.5 just because I find that to be a little bit better. And then we have a VSP and an HSP, which is basically your vertical speed and your horizontal speed. You do not need any variables. You don't need to name anything the way that I'm naming them. This is how I've developed over time. This is what I find works for me. So we're going to set up this stuff, and we're going to set up an attacking thing. So attack equals false. We want to set that false by default, and then we'll add an attack timer, which is going to be, let's say we can attack every 25 frames. By default, if you open up settings here, by default, GameMaker runs in 60 frames per second. You can set this to 30 if you want, but I think 60 is good because it keeps it very smooth. So we're going to keep it at 60. So technically, if I were to have this at 30, you'd be shooting every half second. So let's put it at 20. So every third of a second, you can shoot. So I think that's all we need for now, to be honest, in the create event. So now we're going to add a new event, and we're going to create a step event, which this happens every step of the game, which is, I guess, technically like a frame. It's going to run this code all the time consistently as long as the object is in the room and doing something. So in here, we're going to create some stuff. We're going to create some controls. So if you can comment stuff by just putting 2 slashes here. So we're going to just write controls. I do this just to break up my code, make it a little bit easier to read. And so how I set up controls, how many other people have set up controls, is I just kind of name them under variables. So let's say key up. So this is when we want to move up. So key up is going to equal keyboard check, which is basically going to check if the keyboard is pressing a key, and then we can put in a key here. If you're using, you can do something like this. You can do VK up, and that will work fine. But you can also, if you want, because we're going to be using the mouse and stuff, you want to use WASD. You'd have to type in ORD. That's for any kind of letter keyboard press, and then just press in some of these quotations here, and then you want to put a capital W, and this is gonna how you can set up key bindings for any letter on your keyboard. So it's a little bit more annoying, but we're gonna do key up, key right, key down, and key left, and then we can just, D, S, and A, the corresponding things. And there we go. We have controls set up, which currently they obviously don't do anything, but we have them set up. So now let's do our movement. I'm trying to go over this quickly so I don't waste your time, but at the same time, I'm trying to explain things. So I hope you guys are okay with this. We're just having a chill time. So yes, we got our things set up here, and now we're going to have our vertical speed. So VSP is going to equal the difference here, the difference between key up and key down. All right. So basically, actually these are reversed, because how GameMaker works is the right and down are positives and left and up are negative. So we're going to have these actually reversed here. And this should make sense, but basically how this would work is if this value, so if you're pressing D, key right, oh, sorry, I meant S. If you're pressing S, key down is going to equal 1. If you're pressing W, key up is going to equal 1. So we're doing, you know, key down minus key up. So this would technically be, if both were being pressed, it would be 1 minus 1, which equals 0. So you're not moving in the vertical direction. If key up was pressed and key down wasn't, 0 minus 1 equals -1, and so forth. So we're going to do the same thing for the horizontal speed here. Key left for the negative and key right for the positive. And yeah, this should be a little bit straightforward. And then all we have to do is just times this by our speed variable, just in case you want to set up different speeds and stuff like that. So we're just going to times that by our speed, because if these are always going to equal 1, -1, or 0, then if our speed is 1.5, it'll always equal 1.5, -1.5, or 0. So yeah, that's it. That's all you got to do. And then we're going to say X is going to plus equal, so it's going to add your HSP every frame. And same thing with our Y plus equals VSP. And yeah, so the X and the Y are the actual coordinates of your object. So this is what's actually going to influence what the object is doing. We're going to end up setting up some shooting in a sec, but actually we can do that now. Let's do that now. Let's be consistent and set up each object one at a time. All right. I think that makes sense. So shooting, we're going to do if attack equals false. So if we are not attacking, actually, I guess we should do that differently. So we're going to set this up as key attack, and we're just going to make that another control here. So key attack is going to equal, let's say, I guess it would be the mouse button, right? I guess that makes the most sense. So we're going to do mouse check button, which is going to be the same thing. And then we should be able to do left click, key left. Does that work? No, mouse. No, I think it's MB. Sorry, I haven't done this in a little bit, but yeah, it's MB left. So there we go. So now when you have the mouse button left being pressed, then it's going to make key attack equal true. And that's an easy way to set this up, is if key attack, and if you just put it in brackets, it's the same thing as saying if key attack equals true. Same thing. So yeah, so if key attack is being activated, then we're going to check some stuff. So the first thing that we're going to check is the timer. So we're going to run this timer, and we're going to say if key attack is equal to true, if attack timer is less than or equal to 0, then, which these curly brackets is how you will close in a certain phrase. So if this is less than or equal to 0, then we're going to activate the attack. And so what we want to do is actually activate the attack. So the first thing we would do is create attack timer back to the attack timer default. So we can actually set this up. We could just put this as 25, but unfortunately I do not like using just integers and floats like that. So instead we're going to create attack timer max, and our attack timer max is just going to also equal 20, and that will work fine. So then we can plug that in here, and boom, you guys got a nice a reload system there. Very easy to set up. And then the other thing that we would do is we would create the bullet, and we'll do that after we set up the bullet. So next we're just going to create another object, and we're going to do obullet. We'll set up all the player controls first. So we're going to go obullet, create this bullet, create a create event. You guys have done this before, so you're experienced now. And we're going to set up a few variables again. So this time I'm actually going to set up it a little bit different. I'm going to be using built-in variables. So actually, you know what? Yeah, we'll do that because it's the easiest thing. It's not the most consistent thing, but it is very easy. So let's just say the bullet moves at a speed of 3. Okay. Then we can set up our direction. So direction by default, we can equal to 0 just because we're going to be changing this in the player object here. We'll change that. But you just need to set it to some kind of default. So let's set that up there. And then we can just create a death thing, a death sequence. So death equals false. The only reason I'm setting this up like this is because it allows you to do more with it if you want to in the future expand on this and create some kind of particle explosion on the death effect. You can do that. So this is just setting it up nicely. We'll just go in here. The only thing we really need here is if death equals true, then we're going to set instance destroy, which is basically just going to destroy this object. That is all that's going to happen, because every other collision is going to work in the other objects, the enemy object, the wall object. But yeah, so that's good. The other thing that we can do is we can create another event, go to other, and go outside of room. So if this object is outside of the room, we're just also going to destroy it, just so it doesn't, persist in the world and add more, add more objects to our room that isn't necessary. So very easy to set up, but that's our bullet. And then we can go back here, and then we can just set up some stuff here. So let's now get rid of this code, and we'll say instance create, and we're going to put it on a layer. So if you go into the room here, sorry I'm doing these out of order, but we have an instances layer and a background layer. So our background layer, we can just change the color. I like to just use muted out darker colors. So we're going to do something like this. Just, keep it basic, keep it simple. So that's our background layer. And then we can have our instances layer, and we'll have, let's just create a new layer. So go right click on the layer properties and go create a new instance layer. And we can rename this by clicking F2 on your keyboard, and we'll just name this bullet. So that's gonna be our bullet layer. All right. So then we can plug in this stuff here. So we're gonna go X. So it's going to take our player's X, so our player object X, because that's what we're in right now. Our player object Y, and then we're going to add the layer. So we're going to go bullet layer. And then for the object, we can just go O bullet to associate with the bullet object. So it's going to create that object. And an easy way to plug in variables directly into this specific object is if you just name this. So let's just say B for bullet. So B is going to equal this line of code. B will actually basically be the identification for this object that we're creating. So we can go B dot direction is equal to distance to mouse, distance to point. So we go distance to point, and then we can just plug in our mouse X and our mouse Y, so that it's basically going to go from, I guess we could set up, okay, hold on, let me set up distance to object. Oh no, that's not the right thing. Okay, this is fine. So yeah, if you want to see it more specific, all you have to do is click the middle scroll mouse button, and you can actually read all of the documentation. So it's very easy to set up any kind of thing that you're working with, but because you can just look it up in the help and you can see how it works. But this should work fine. If we have issues, we can fix it. But yeah, so this is going to set up the bullet. So we create a bullet if our attack timer is equal to 0. And then the last thing that we have to do is just to decrease our timer. So every step of the game, we're going to do attack timer plus equals -1. So every step of the frame, it will minus off 1 value from our attack timer. And then I guess if you want to be safe about it, you can just do if attack timer is greater than 0, then we do this then we run this script, just so it doesn't need to run into the negatives and we don't have to worry about that if you don't attack for a long time. And that's all of our player code. That is literally all of our player code. And then, yeah, so bullet and player is done. So let's create another object. We're going to create an O enemy. I hope you guys are still following. I hope this is straightforward enough. We're going to create another script, or not a script here. We're going to create an event, a create event, and we're going to set up a couple things here. So we're just going to create a speed variable. Actually, we could do the same thing that we're doing with the bullets. So speed is equal to, let's say 1, because that's slightly slower than the player speed. You know what? Let's set it to like 1.75, just so that eventually these things will catch up to our player. You can do whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. It's your game. So direction is going to equal. We can just do direction. Oh, you know what? I set this up wrong. I did distance to point. That's not the right thing. That's not what we need. We need the direction. I am very sorry about that. Let's check it here. We need point direction. That's what we need. We need point direction. I am so sorry about that. So we're going to take it from our X and Y values and move it to the mouse X and the mouse Y. That's, if you tried to run anything and you got some weird stuff going on, that's probably what was happening. But you know, you find your errors, you fix them, it's all good. So we're just going to do point direction. And it's going to be from same thing. So we're going to go from our X and Y. So this is the enemy's X and Y to the O player .x and O player .y, and I'll explain that in a sec. So if you're trying to relate to a different object, all you have to do is relate the object by putting in what object you want it, and then put a dot to relate to it, and then whatever variable or value you want associated. So very easy way to you know, link other objects in one object's event. So yeah, very easy. And I think this is all we need for the create event. So we're just going to copy this code now and then put it in the step event, just so that this information is constantly updating, because we want it to basically imitate moving towards the player. So that's all we need. And then we can just do, we can set up a nice little thing here, and we can say bullet equals instance place. I'll explain this. Instance place XY O bullet. So this is basically going to check. Bullet is going to either be true or false here in this statement. And so what it's doing is it's going to check if our X and Y is colliding with a bullet object. And if it is, so if bullet does not equal no one, so if it is hitting something, then we can do any kind of code we want here. So this is going to be our collision with bullet. And so for this example, we would destroy the bullet and also destroy the enemy. You can set up, if you wanted to, you could set something up like HP plus equals -5 if you have some kind of HP bar. I guess we could do that. Or you could just set it up the easy way and do instance destroy and just do it like that. But I think HP would be more fun. So let's set up an HP. HP equals 10, and then we can set an HP max just in case. We don't need it for this example, but just to be consistent, we'll set it up like that. All right, sound good? Sound good? I hope so. So we're going to do HP plus equals -5. So technically it would take 2 bullets to kill an enemy. This might be a little bit difficult for our first game, but I think it's okay. And then we also want to relate to our bullet object. So bullet dot death is going to equal to true. And boom, just like that, that is how we get this nonsense working. That is how we relate to the objects. So That is how you do that. I hope it's very self-explanatory. And then we're just going to set another thing. We're going to say if HP is less than or equal to 0, kind of like how we set up our timer. If it's less than or equal to 0, then we're just going to instance destroy. And that's it. That's all we got to do. If you wanted to, you could set up some kind of health regeneration by doing like at every frame, you're going to plus equal 0.01 or something like that, or set up a timer that every 5 seconds he gains back 1 health. That's probably a better way to do it, but I don't think we need health regen. That's a little weird. So this is good. This is our enemy. The only other thing we need to do is we're going to copy this code again. It's very easy to copy code and place it again. So copy the code and then change this to player. Just change all of these variables to player so we can relate it to the player object. And then we are going to set, we don't really need to do this, but let's just set HP equal to 0 just so it destroys it on colliding. And then we're going to say player dot death equals true. And we can just set up a quick death for our player as well. So we'll just say if death equals true, we'll say room restart. So this is just going to restart the room. And if you ever put in a new variable like I did here, make sure to go in the create event and set it to a default value. So we're going to set it to false by default because we don't want to kill our player when he enters the room. And you know what? This should be good. We don't need this anymore, actually. So we set up a player, we set up a bullet, we set up an enemy. So the last thing we got to do is set up the gun and the wall, and we have a working game. So guys, we're almost there. We're going to do the gun just because the gun is basically useless. The way that we have it set up here is pretty much useless. So we're just going to take the gun, put it on here, and in the create event, we're just going to say image angle equals point direction. So same code that we've been using, point direction, our X and our Y, and put that to mouse X and mouse Y. There's a couple more things that we have to get done here, so I'm going to try to get them done soon, but we can set this up, and this is really all we need. So we just copy this code and we put this in the step event so it runs that code at every frame. And just like that, you got a little gun that's going to move towards your camera, or your cursor, so that you can actually do something with it. And then the last object is the wall object, and the wall object is going to be very, very similar. We can actually, what we can do, delete this, and we can actually right click on this and duplicate the enemy object. And this is not as much of a wall as it is a obstacle, or yeah, it's not really a wall. We can set up walls. It's very easy to set up walls, but this is supposed to be the most basic understanding of how this works. So let's just get rid of this stuff. We don't need anything in the create event, actually. All we don't need the direction, and we can get rid of this stuff. All we need to do is basically set our bullet and our player to die when we collide with this thing. So it's not really a wall. I guess we could call it a death thingy. Let's name it death thingy, or death thing. Sorry guys, I'm kind of weird sometimes, but yeah. So this should be everything that we need. I think we got everything set up here. Very easy. You know what we could do is we could just, for the gun, we could just set recharge equal to false, okay? And so what recharge is going to be if we're going to relate to the player object. So if oPlayer dot attack timer is greater than 0, then that means that we can't shoot. So this is going to be recharge equals true. And then we can set another statement, and we can say else. So if this is not the correct phrase that's happening. So if it is less than or equal to 0, technically, that's what we're saying, is by putting this else statement here. It's connected to this. We can say recharge equals false, if I can type. And then we can just say if recharge equals true. Oh, I said rechange. If recharge equals true, then we can change our image blend, which is basically going to be the color of our sprite. So we can say image blend. Oh, can't type. So image blend equals C_gray, which that's how you set up colors. You can type in whatever color you want and it should come up. I mean, as long as it's a relatively okay thing. I guess red would make more sense. It won't look too pretty, but it portrays the information better. So just so you guys understand what we're doing. Again, all of this stuff is things that you can customize. That's what I'm trying to do here, is set things up that it's easy for you guys to customize. But we're going to do image blend equals C_white, which is basically going to return it as normal. Another way to write this is just doing image blend equals -1. It means the same thing, but I think just keep consistent and have one precise method of doing things. So that is going to be how we set all this stuff up. And so what we can do is, just to make sure, our player is never going to get destroyed. But what you can do is, if you want to destroy the player and the gun for some reason is still in the room, you might crash your game. So what you could do is anything that relates to an object outside of this object, you can just say if instance exists. So if this object is in the room, and then just relate it to whatever object you want, then carry out this code. So if there is no player object in the room, none of this code will run, because we don't want it to run, because there is no player to relate it to, so it's going to give you an error. You can do this stuff for the other objects as well, but I think we're okay, because this information is kind of also applying. You don't need a player object in the room, because then this would return false and it wouldn't run this code. So we're okay there. I think we're good on everything, actually. So now we can just set things up in the room, but just to keep it simple, we're just going to set up our character to create the gun on creation. So we're going to just instance create and then set this on the same layer as the bullet. So we're going to do on our X and on our Y. And then put this in the bullet just so it appears on top of the player. And we're going to say, oh, gun. And that should be good. The other thing we need to do is we'll create a spawner. We'll create an O spawner object. And that will actually be the last thing that we do. So we're just going to create that at the start of the room as well. X, Y. It doesn't matter what layer this is on, because it's not going to be visible to us, but we can set up a spawner object, and that's going to spawn our enemies into the room. And the other thing we need to do is make sure that our gun object is always equal to our player object. Easiest way to do that, X equals oPlayer.x, Y equals oPlayer.y. Boom, just like that, we got our gun moving towards our player. Exactly. It's just going to have the same coordinates, and that's all we got to do. Super simple. So the last thing is creating this spawner. So in the spawner object, we say enemy spawn equals false. So this is going to check if we're spawning an object. And then we create an enemy spawn timer equals, let's say, every 120 frames. So every 2 seconds we create an enemy. All right, cool, done, nice, good. The other thing we need to do is create an enemy X. So we'll keep it consistent. Enemy spawn X is going to equal, by default, just set it to 0. All right, And there, that's good. Let's also copy this, create it again, and just type in max, just so we are consistent. Create a max, add an event, step, boom, done, boom, there we go. And then, yeah, so in here now, we're doing a lot of the same stuff that we've already done, which is good because you guys should kind of understand what we're doing here. But we're gonna say if enemy spawn timer is greater than 0, then we're gonna minus it off. So if enemy spawn timer is less or is greater than 0, then it is not equal to 0 or less than 0. So we're going to have to minus it off 1 every frame. And then we can just set this up by saying else. So if this statement is false, then we can say enemy spawn equals true. You don't technically need this extra line, but I'm just making sure that you guys understand what we're doing here. So we say enemy spawn equals true. If enemy spawn equals true, use those curly brackets again, and we want to set this up. So we're going to re-put enemy spawn timer back to equal enemy spawn timer max, so that this only happens once, and then we can create an enemy here. And so how we're going to do this is we can randomize the seed. Typing in randomize just randomizes a seed. You don't need to do it, but I like to make sure that it's always random, just in case. It's just one extra line of code, so it doesn't do too much. But we can basically set this up so that enemy spawn x is equal to, and then we can randomize some kind of variable. So if we go into the room object and we see how big, so our canvas, let's just keep this at 1000 by 1000. So that's how big our room is 1000 by 1000. Okay. We'll set that up. They'll set the room up after, but so it's 1000 by 1000. So we can go from the midpoint. We're gonna calculate this from the midpoint. So let's set up our x at equal to room width divided by 2, which is going to be the center, and y equals room height divided by 2. So that way we're centering our object. We're going to do this actually for the player as well, just on the create event. So we're always going to be in the center of the room when we start the game. And now we can say we're going to take our x variable and we're going to add a random integer. You can do random, but that's going to give you float numbers, which is decimal numbers. Sorry. So I like to keep it with integers and just do I random range, and we're going to get a range between 2 values. So this value is going to be between, let's say, -500 and 500. So because if we're at the center point, then we're at 500 by 500. So if we go to the maximum amount, -500 is going to equal 0, and 500 is going to equal 1000. Basic math. I think you guys are following. But anyway, so let's just copy this code and change this for the y. So y and y, and there we go. That's it. That's all we got to do. It's not the perfect system because then technically we can have things spawn anywhere. So technically an enemy could spawn on top of your player, but maybe we'll do future episodes and expand on this project. We'll see. I don't know. I'm not exactly the best tutorial maker, so you guys can let me know in the comments if you want me to make more of these. But x, so then we're going to say the x and y is going to plug in these variables that we just made. So enemy spawn x and enemy spawn y, and then we'll put them in the instance layer, so instances, and we're going to create the enemy object. We don't need to relate this. We don't need to do like an e equals whatever, because we don't need any variables there. We've already set up everything in our enemy object. And just like that, we have it working properly. So this should be all of the code, as long as, yeah, so the spawner is in the room, the gun is in the room, bullets are created on impact, the enemies are created from the spawner, and the death thing, the collider object thing, we can just place them in the room. So you could just, let me zoom in a little bit. It's kind of far. You could just drag, oh, once you're on a selected layer. So let's go to the instance layer. Or I guess we could, let's create a new layer to go underneath, and we'll just name this one, let's say ground. It's not actually the ground, but I'm just trying to, whatever. You get the point. You can name this, you know, back layer or whatever you want to name it. Environment, maybe environment is the best thing to name it. So you could drag this in, or you could just click on the object. If it's highlighted, hold down Alt and just create object. So let's create just a random room. Let's hope that we don't go in the middle of our room. But we set up just a basic scene here, right? Nothing too nice looking, but it does the job. It does the job. And we're good to go. So now let's just drag in our player on the instances layer. And if you double click, you can actually find these settings. So just to make sure that there's nothing colliding with it, let's just center it into the room. This doesn't matter. So we don't have anything here. So I'll just show you guys. I can put this over here, and we're still going to be created on this center point because we set that up in the room thing. So that way you guys understand what's going on. So if we run this code, actually the last thing we need to, oh, you know what? I'll do it like this. So we run the code, but you guys are going to see that, oh, we forgot something. So that's good. You guys can see this is the fatal error message. So it's good to always see because you're going to see this a lot. So in the death object, we still have HP set up here, and we don't have that variable. So that is why we got an error. But if we run this code now, you guys are going to see that the game doesn't work exactly how you want it to work, right? It technically, oh my god. Okay, so yeah, that's embarrassing. Okay, so we definitely screwed up on the spawner there. We didn't okay, so going back, so our enemy spawn timer is going to equal 120. So if enemy spawn is equal to true, we want to set enemy spawn back to false. So that's why it kept creating things like all the time. So this is going to work fine. We set up our thing. It's fixed now. Let's actually move this down to like 100 or maybe 90 every 1.5 seconds, just because maybe we can make it start at 120. So it starts at 2 seconds, but then 90 frames for every enemy that spawned after that. So this is all good, and the last thing is the room isn't set up correctly, right? And so we actually need to go into here, into down here. We can go and check these things. So go into viewport cameras. We want to enable viewports, and then just go into the viewport 0 just because that's default, and let's make it visible. And then set up this camera. Let's say we want our canvas to be maybe half of this size. So actually that's still pretty big. Let's do like, I don't know if this isn't going to be an exact prop. This is going to give you a square, but let's say 250 by 250, just because all of our sprites are just squares and stuff, so it doesn't really matter. But we can still set this to be larger. This is our camera property, so this is how our camera is going to appear, what it's going to view. And then the viewport is how big it's going to appear on your actual monitor display screen. So let's do 1,000 by 1,000 just to keep the scaling correctly. So this is going to work, right? But if I run the game, we're just going to see this. We're just going to see in the corner some black things, and we're not going to see our player. So an easy way to set this up, not the best way, but an easy way to set it up, is just object following, go onto the player object, and now we're going to follow the player object, and this is our borders. So this is where it starts to kind of move. So because our thing is 250, we could set this up as 125 by 125, and this would technically be exactly moving on our player, but I don't think you want that. So let's just set it to like, let's say 90. So the borders would kind of come from all directions. So if you want to like draw basically like imaginary lines, it would come out 90 from each direction. And so within that, our player can move and the camera doesn't move. But if we move outside of that, then it'll start to move towards the player. -1 for horizontal and vertical speed is going to just equal, like, it'll just automatically move to that location. So we could set it up like that, but I'll show you guys if we actually introduce a speed, how it'll work. So there we go. We got our thing going, and our character is going to move around, and the screen will move around with the player, and everything is working how we want it to work. However, if we set this to a value like 1, that's actually less than our screen. So let's set these borders up even more. So let's do like 110 by 110. And maybe make the screen a little bit bigger, because I found that it was a little bit too small. So let's do that, and then also maybe set up our speed to be 2 and our bullet speed to be larger as well. So let's set our bullet speed to be 4, and let's increase the rate of fire, so by decreasing the amount of cooldown time. So now we got a little bit of a better game. Also, the other thing I noticed is the gun was looking a little bit small. So in the create event, we can just add an image X scale. So this is going to scale our image on the horizontal axis is going to equal 2, and image Y scale is going to equal 2 as well. So this is just going to double the size of the image. It's not going to be the best game. We made it in, what, 20 minutes? Less? More? So this is going to move. So we can set up our camera to move default to our screen quicker. But as you can see, it doesn't kill the enemies right away. You actually have to hit them twice. So 1, 2. But it all works. And is this the best way to do this? No. But look, we ran into the wall and we died. So yeah, I mean, it's something, right? It's the start of something. Is it anything crazy? No. No, it's not. Let's actually just put this to 500, 500. This is the starting position of the thing. Oh, no, wait. We don't want that. We want 250 maybe? Anyway, it doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be exact. Oh, it's this value. That's why. So let's set this also to 300 at 300 just to keep it almost centered. So that way, when you start the room, the camera is already offset. So it's going to be closer to the player. There we go. And this is just going to work fine. So we got our little gun. We shoot. I really hate the red guys, but, you know, got to do what you got to do. So, and then every time you run into an enemy or a wall, you are going to reset the room. So this is just a super easy way to set up a game. And actually, also, if you hit these, the bullet is also going to die. So play around with it. I might continue the series and we create like an actual nice looking game out of this. But this is honestly, to me, this is the simplest way to set up a game that is fun, that you can play forever. This game will never end until eventually you screw up and make a mistake. This game's super easy, but you can start to introduce other things. We might do it for future episodes. We might do this as a mini series where we just create a basic top-down shooter game, endless shooter. So if you guys want to see that, hit the like button. We've been growing the channel a lot lately, so I don't know. If we can get, I don't know how many views this video is going to get, but if we can get 300 likes, actually that might be a lot. If we can get 200 likes, I will continue this series, and we will start introducing things like actual sprites, and a high score, so you guys can actually get points from these guys. We can maybe introduce a little HUD so that you can see how much health the enemies have, how much health you have. We can set up a player health bar instead of just dying on command. We can set up actual collisions, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, guys, this is going to do it for the first episode. I'm not huge on making these kind of videos. I do a lot more game development type, learning videos, and you know, the devlogs and stuff. But I wanted to try something out. I wanted to do something different. So I hope you guys learned something or had fun, at least for a little bit. But that's going to do it for today's video. So I'll see you guys when I see you. I hope you learned something. I'm going to die. There we go. And yeah, have a great day.